Michael, thank you so much indeed for joining us. What do you think? What's your reaction to Joe Biden's promise, if he becomes president, to overturn that travel ban on Muslim-majority countries?
Well, it's important to remember that the travel ban was based on countries whose transportation methodologies were not deemed sufficiently secure. Most Muslim majority, the largest Muslim majority countries in the world are exempt from it, and it's not targeted specifically at Muslims. So there's been, I think, a little bit of politicization of the way that's been described. And in fact, some countries have been removed from the list, some added to the list since it was originally put in place. I think Biden's promises and commitments aren't held very credibly by the American people. I think there's a great degree of concern that the 8 years under which he were vice president were essentially unremarkable economically and otherwise for the country. And I think the real question is, can the American people be brought to recognize the first 3 years of the Trump administration, with over 7 million jobs created, wages rising, many promises fulfilled, when we're in the middle of this pandemic, which clearly has changed everyone's life and changed the political culture as well.
Sure. I mean, you say the travel ban has been politicized, but so too is the issue of domestic terrorism, hasn't it? Because U.S. intelligence agencies have been saying quite regularly that the biggest threat in terms of domestic terror in the United States does not come from anyone who consider themselves a Muslim or an immigrant. It comes from white supremacists on the far right in the U.S.
There's clearly no room for violence in the United States. The violence that we've predominantly been confronting, since May, has been the street violence of an organization that now is considered both Marxist and has been using very totalitarian and harmful tactics that I think are being rejected by the American people. That too will be essentially on the ballot in November. Is how do American people sort of respond to these Democrat mayors that have allowed this violence to occur? I think for the most part, the American people have not viewed it favorably, and that sentiment has grown as the duration of these violent protests have gone on.
I mean, you highlighted some of what you see as Donald Trump's achievements during this first term of his presidency. How do you feel about his management of the economy in terms of just the Tea Party's general philosophy about the ballooning debt? Because he is adding $3 trillion to the national debt even before all of the extra measures taken because of coronavirus. So has he managed that part of it properly as far as the Tea Party's philosophy is concerned?
Well, I think for those who are close to it, we realize that all spending originates in our House of Representatives. And when we have a political situation like we've had, where Democrats have controlled the House and have essentially proven in many ways unwilling to negotiate, it's been difficult because simultaneously, while I think the American people have concerns about the growing debt, they also have concerns about shutdowns in government or stagnated politics. This administration has been pretty accommodating with Democrats and maybe less concerned about the debt in their defense. I don't think we're seeing any of the signs of inflation, even sector-wise, that would prove immediately concerning. And when we talked about the debt and the deficits during the Obama administration, I think we really described them as euphemisms for expansions of federal government into areas that really weren't prescribed by our Constitution and were often deemed wasteful and counterproductive.
Michael, can I ask you something that's really quite contentious at the moment in the United States? And It's about race and identity. Because when people are surveyed, when there have been national surveys undertaken to see who has sympathy for the Tea Party, you find a lot of respondents have these Christian ideologies that also intertwine with their concerns about race and about the white race being diminished in the United States. I mean, is that still the case for most of your supporters? Is that the way you see it? Because the national surveys seem to indicate that that is how people perceive this issue in the United States when they have any sort of understanding or affiliation, not necessarily being active in the Tea Party, but sympathizing with it.
Our founding principles were ones of adherence to the Constitution, limited government, and lower taxes. Some of our most prominent leaders in the Tea Party movement have been and are African Americans. We were involved in electing the first African American senator Republican senator ever in the history of this country in South Carolina with Tim Scott. And the movement has always been welcoming of all races, all religions, and has been inclusive. And we've sought to consciously go out and expand that right now. I think right now an opportunity exists for the Tea Party movement and for those who have alternative, proven means of development to go into America's cities and begin communicating and asking if maybe there's some better ways to go about doing these things. So it is incumbent on us to be consciously and proactively outreaching, and for those conversations to be as much listening sometimes as they are talking. I think there's been a lot of politicization in the attempt to tear down the movement, but the political success is undeniable. We took back the House of Representatives in 2010, blocking Obama's legislative initiatives for 6 of the 8 years, took back the Senate. And if you look at the tactics of the Trump campaign in 2016 and even now, I think they're largely based on the rally-based populism that we put in place very successfully beginning in 2009. And our movement is very much aligned and very supportive with this president. Many of his top administration officials, including the Chief of Staff or Secretary of State, have come out of the Tea Party movement.
Sure. Michael, really appreciate your spending time with us on the News Hour. Michael Johns, co-founder of the Tea Party movement in the US.